All right. I want to say hello from Michigan State University and welcome to EAB University's Fall Webinar Series, which is funded by the USDA Forest Service. This is Robin Usborne, and along with my EAB University colleagues, Cliff Sadoff and Elizabeth Barnes from Purdue University and Amy Stone from The Ohio State University, we welcome you to today's webinar on the gypsy moth, past, present, and future, which is being presented by David Adkins, the Agriculture Inspection Manager and Gypsy Moth Program Manager with the Ohio Department of Agriculture's Plant Pest Control Section. David has been with the department for almost 26 years, and he graduated from The Ohio State University with a degree in agronomy. Before we get started, please know that we welcome your comments and questions today. Type them into the chat feature, which you can find by either mousing over the bottom or occasionally the top of your screen. And David will be responding to these questions and comments during the question and answer session at the end of the webinar presentation. To keep these free webinars coming, we need your feedback. After the webinar, you will be mailed a link to a short, voluntary, confidential survey that I hope you will take the time to fill out. And if you're one of the first 10 people to fill out the survey, we will be sending you a goodie bag. For those of you wanting CEUs and CCH credits today, I will be sending you information on how to obtain these in the aforementioned email. So this webinar is being recorded, and you will be able to view it soon at www.emeraldashboard.info. You will also find the recordings for all previous EAB University webinars there. Thank you for attending today. And David, feel free to start your presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate being invited to speak with this group. I hope what I have is informative to you and gives you a little background into the gypsy moth here in the U.S. and what we've been doing here in the last couple decades to slow its spread. We are talking about the Gypsy Moth Slow Spread Program. It's a national integrated pest management program, and we're going to give us a little timeline of how we got to where we are today. As with any good story, you have to start in the beginning, and here we go. In 1869, gypsy moth egg masses were brought to Medford, Massachusetts, by a entomologist, Mr. Trevellet. We believe he was doing some experiments to try to improve the silkworm with the gypsy moth, the native silkworms here in the U.S., because at the time in Europe, there was a devastating protozoa disease that was killing the silkworms. So they were trying to find something a little bit better, a little resistant to that disease. So that's why he brought it to the U.S., we believe. There's various reports of how it got loose. Storms came through and ripped the netting off the trees that he was rearing them on in his backyard. As far as seeing how much or how gypsy moth can chew through about anything, they probably chewed their way out of the netting, most likely. But whatever way they got loose, they were released into the environment at that time. In 1879, it was 10 years later, the populations finally started to develop and where residents were starting to notice them. And then 10 years after that, in 1889, they became so abundant that the public started an outcry for the government to take measures. So in 1890, the state of Massachusetts did appropriate funds to eradicate the gypsy moth. Their efforts, they thought, were successful. So in 1900, they stopped funding the program. By 1905, measures had to be resumed because the populations developed up again to the point where they were causing widespread defoliation. and they were starting to move outside of the state of Massachusetts. So in 1906, the U.S. Congress first appropriated money for the USDA to slow the spread of the gypsy moth. Then in 1910 and 1911, sometime in that area, the Anthemothica complex or fungus was introduced from Japan to also help try to slow the spread of the gypsy moth, but it did not really establish itself at that time. In 1912, the enactment of the first federal quarantine on gypsy moth was imposed. So it took a little while from that 1869 point to 1912 before they finally started putting in the quarantine to regulate the materials moving out of those zones. 1923 to 1939, barrier zones were tried to sort of put a wall up for the gypsy moth to keep it from moving on to other states. There was a nice long one put along the east side of the New York state border with the other New England states to try to reduce that advancement. Even though the gypsy moth continued to move westward, the barrier zones method was pretty good at a credible way of deterring the rate of spread. So it is continued in further later on and also in our current SDS program. In 1941, funding was drastically cut because of the World War II, so efforts to slow the spread were minimized. In the 1950s, early populations expanded greatly again. State and federal officials again reestablished the barrier zones, and then there were plans to implement funds were curtailed again due to the Korean War back in the 50s. So this funding process with the gypsy moth was ongoing even back in the early stages. This next photo is one I really like to show. This was the early methods of controlling gypsy moth. You see these guys climbing these trees and hanging on the branches with no ropes or anything. This was definitely well before OSHA came into effect, but it is very interesting how they took measures to control gypsy moth back in the early or late 1800s and early 1900s. Another early form was spraying. This was probably the first sprayer. I wouldn't call it a agricultural floater or whatever we call them today, but I sort of worry about what's in that tank and what they're spraying. It's a good old picture to look at. Excuse me. In 1956, Congress jumped back into the gypsy moth problem and made funds available again for a 3-state eradication. DDT was used at that time, but was later curtailed because of the concerns of its effect. So the next 10 years, 1959 to 1969, populations continued to grow and spread. Then in 1970, a new development, the female sex pheromone dispar lure was identified and isolated. So this really changed things as far as how we started to look at controlling the spread of the gypsy moth. And then in 1971, USDA directed $1 million to the Forest Service to start research, extensive research on how to come up with control measures for the gypsy moth. In 1972, Bacillus thuringiensis christaki, or BTK, was first used on gypsy moth control because DDT had been banned by the EPA. And then there was a proposal to use pheromones to suppress gypsy moth mating also, which also changed things in our method. Then in 1975 to 78, Congress provided $2.4 million to the USDA to accelerate research and development. There was a need to develop that integrated pest management program with the barrier zones, with the use of pheromones, and now the BTK. So funding started to become available. And then there was in 1978, first published economic assessment of the benefits of, and cost of containing the gypsy moth, and it did prove to be economical to make this effort. Then in 1979, the first use of the synthetic pheromone flake was used in Wisconsin and tested out. So it took about 9 years for a method of carrying the pheromone to be implemented and used and tested. So, but then in 1980 to 1982, 26.1 million acres were defoliated in eastern United States by the gypsy moth. Now, to give you a comparison, the state of Ohio has 26 million acres in it. So over the whole eastern U.S., an area the size of the state of Ohio was defoliated there between 1980 and 1982. In 1983 through 87, Maryland implemented a gypsy moth integrated pest management program pilot project. And then in 1988 to 1992, the Appalachian integrated pest management program was implemented in West Virginia and Virginia. So these two integrated pest management programs led to the start of what we call now the Gypsy Moth Slow to Spread project. This map here shows some of the barrier zones that were used. The first one over there was in 1923, which was along the New York border with the eastern New England states. And then a second barrier zone was put up in 1952, also slow to spread. And then down lower on the right-hand side, the Maryland Gypsy Moth Integrated Pest Management Program, where it took place there in southern Maryland. And then the Appalachian Integrated Pest Management Program in 1988 through 92, there along the West Virginia border. Then the purple line there shows the slow to spread barrier zone that was implemented as it was in 2005. In 1990, there was another spike in defoliation in the U.S. 7.5 million acres were defoliated. To give you a comparison, the state of Ohio has a roughly 7.5 million acres of forested area. So again, about every acre of forested area in Ohio equivalent was defoliated. Then in 1991, a second economic assessment was done that showed a benefit to cost ratio of 3-to-1, which made it definitely economical to try to slow the spread of this forest pest. And then in 1992, there was a published assessment of the historical spread of gypsy moth, and it was determined that gypsy moth normally move about 20.7 kilometers per year, or roughly 13 miles. Then in 1992 to 1998, the slow spread pilot project was initiated. In 1998, this project went operational, and 11 states, or 10 states along the leading edge, were all trapped with 5 and 8K, or 8K grids. Should have been 8K, I'm sorry, put the wrong figure in there, to establish the first STS action zone, or barrier zone. And that's what we came up with in 1999 from the 1988 trapping results. This shows the barrier zone that went into effect in 1999. STS, in 1999, STS was integrated into the USDA's National Strategy for Managing Gypsy Moth. When that occurred, basically we had 3 projects developed, and I'm going to give the example here in Ohio. The 3 project zones were suppression, slow to spread, and eradication. The suppression, its goal was to, reduce the damage by the gypsy moth by just suppressing, providing an opportunity for landowners to have acres treated that were heavily infested to help take pressure off the infestation line. Slow to spread, that is the barrier zone that we are actively trapping and delimiting to isolate populations and try to take care of them before they become too large. And that's what we're working on very hard to reduce that natural spread. And then we have an eradication zone here in Ohio. Basically, where APHIS PPQ works with us to eliminate isolated infestations, basically due to human movement of infested materials. So that's the 3 zones that we have currently working here in Ohio, and most of the other states that fall in line with that. In 2000, the Gypsy Moth Slow to Spread Foundation was formed. This is a collaboration of the 10 states to put people on the board to help mitigate the funding to the states, and it's been a very good program, foundation with people working together to cooperatively slow the spread. In 2000, also the first treatments under the STS program began. The Gypsy Moth Foundation is made up of the state officials of the 10 states. The objective of the program is to slow the natural spread by 60% and to help protect at least 70% of the hardwood forest that hasn't been touched by the gypsy moth. This is a unified and coordinated project. It's area-wide action based on needs through the STS Foundation framework. And again, the cooperation has been amazing between all the 10 states. And it also standardizes the actions across multiple administrative and jurisdictional boundaries. So we tried to make our steps evenly across, and it has worked out. And we utilize a decision algorithm that was developed and is currently located at Virginia Tech University to help facilitate that. Here is the susceptible host distribution of the hardwoods that gypsy moth would affect. As you see, if you can visualize the line, barrier line that we have, you can see that a lot of area has not been touched, that 70% that we talked about earlier. The STS objective is to slow the spread. The natural spread is at 20.7 kilometers per year. The program goal is to reduce that rate by 60% or down to 8.3 kilometers per year. Here we're showing a comparison of the barrier zones as they were back in 1999 versus what they are here in 2018. So you can see it really hasn't moved too much. We haven't been able to move it back here in Ohio and Indiana a little bit, and but we have definitely slowed that spread of the gypsy moth. Under the program, the states are divided into different regions, and the spread rates are evaluated in each one of those regions. We have the northern region, central, and southern regions as part of the program. This is a diagram showing the spread rates The one on the left shows all three regions. It's a little bit messy. So we'll break it out a little bit and show you the one on the right. This is an average of all spread rates. So as you can see, we have been very successful, and we've averaged out a spread rate of about 3.4 kilometers per year since 2000. So the STS program has worked very well. A note I want to bring up is in the years between 2005 and 2009, you'll see a spike in the spread rate upward. This was a time during which the federal government was in a big budget crunch, and our budget got whacked by about 40% in those years. And so we went from about 14 million down to 8 million in funding for the project. So we couldn't do as much treatment as we normally did during that time period. So population did spike upward and spread spiked upward. That forced us basically to do some changes in our treatments and so forth. I know here in Ohio, we started looking more at core infestations and treating them with the BTK, and then doing the majority of our other low population areas with mating disruption. And with that method, we were able to cut our spray budgets way down and still be effective. We did change some grid sizes, detection grid sizes. The barrier zone or action zone was all done in 2K, and we took half of it and did 3K on it, so we saved in the number of traps we had to put out and so forth. So we did make some adjustments because of the federal budget cuts, and it has continued to help the program move forward. But as I'll talk later in the talk here, that we're at probably the end of what we can do effectively with the budget that we're working with. The regions are also divided into zones to see how each individual zone is reacting or responding to our efforts. We've got zones 1 through 13 in here. And what we'll do is we'll go to each zone and see how each zone is working and how effective the program is in each one. This is a graph showing the spread rates in all 12 zones together. As you can see, that's pretty much a mess. So we'll break it down and take each zone individually and see how everything is doing. Okay, we'll do the start up in zones 2, 3, and 4. This is basically in the Wisconsin area. You'll see the orange line is the natural spread, and the dark gray line is the STS goal, is what we're shooting for, and then the blue lines are the actual spread rates that have occurred in each of those regions. As you can see, the northern region has had a little rough time in meeting the goal in this area, whereas southern Wisconsin has fared a little bit better in keeping it close to the region. There are some reasons that we're theorizing. We don't know for sure why the spread rates are not being kept in check up in this region like they are in the other two. So one reason that's been thrown out is the fact that the DA was developed in Virginia and West Virginia in the mountainous areas, and there may be a little bit of difference of climate and so forth and how the gypsy moth responds and how the DA responds in this area. So I know there's been this discussion that possibly that a separate DA needs to be developed in this area, or we need to look at taking action at lower priority index numbers when they pop up in the decision algorithm. But those are things that we are looking at to see if we can correct some of the spread rates here in the Northwest. In the central region, we got the states of Illinois, Ohio, and Indiana, and we've done very well in this region. In fact, we've met the goals pretty well. There is one little spike there in Illinois in 2015 and so, and that was, I would say, was attributed to the fact that the program manager had to leave for a little bit due to health problems, and there was not much action, no treatments done for a year or two while she was gone. So things did pop up, but they are now, she's back to work and she's getting things under control and doing a great job. Indiana is doing a good job. They've kept things under the goal line of the STS goal over the last decade or so. And then in Ohio, we've been able to do the same thing and have had an overall negative spread rate here in Ohio. In the East region, they've been popping up and down, but again, you'll see that big spike in that 2005 to 2009 region. Again, that's the budget cuts that occurred, but they're working at it very well, and we're hitting the goal as a whole, as a project. We're doing very well. To give you some idea what would happen if we didn't have the STS program versus what the spread rate would be, and then projected Gypsy Moth with the STS. The diagram on the right is the projection spread without the Gypsy Moth slow spread program. As you see, it would pretty much by 2045 take out all that 70% of the hardwoods that we are trying to protect. In the diagram on the left, we're showing the progression with current spread rates that we're doing with the STS program and the treatments and so forth. And as you can see, we're still protecting that 70% hardwood area quite a bit. Now up in the Northwest or Northern region, they are projecting a faster spread rate, and again, we are trying to address that with trying to theorize what's going on up there and what steps we can take to correct that. The goal, national spread rate, again, is 20.7. Our goal was 8.3 kilometers. And excuse me, that should be 8.3 kilometers, not miles. And we are actually reducing that rate by 83% instead of the 60%. So the slow spread project is working with the barrier zones, with the trapping and the decision algorithm and all that that we use to utilize and project where we have our potential problem areas and taking action against that. So our 60% goal is being met with our 83.6% goal. What's in the future? This year, trap data is being collected project-wide. It hasn't all been filtered in yet, so I don't know what's going on in the STS project area as a whole. In Ohio, we did see an increase in catches here in 2018. We had roughly 43,000 moths caught compared to last year at 16,000. So we are definitely seeing an upward trend in the moths here in Ohio. The spread rate is showing a little increase in Northwest Ohio in Region 7, and it's showing a decrease again here in Southeast Ohio. So for Ohio, I think it's going to even out as a roughly a zero advancement for this year, with the Northwest having a slight increase and the Southeast having a slight decrease. So the other thing that we're looking in the future, and I think everyone in universities and state departments and federal departments, is retirements. Especially at the federal and state level, there's a lot of knowledge that's leaving the Gypsy Moth program here in the next 5 years or so or less. This year, we're losing our program manager in the STS program at the federal level. She's retiring. We've got a new person coming in, but she was on the ground floor when the Gypsy Moth program started, and we're seeing a lot of people that were on that ground floor slowly retiring and leaving, and taking a lot of knowledge with them. So it's a little bit of a concern. Another concern is budgets, federal and state level. They're getting tighter. Everyone sees that. I mean, the demand is growing more and more as more invasive species are coming in. Right now in Ohio, we've got the Asian longhorn beetle that we've got 60 state and federal people working on down in West Ohio, and that's takes a lot of money to do that. We're cutting a lot of trees and eradicating this other invasive species, and there's other stuff coming in the West and so forth. So the demand on federal money is getting tighter. Forest fires have been, this past year, just been crazy. The number of forest fires and the amount of money that is taken out of the federal budget. But we're also seeing and realizing that at a certain budget level, once it's hit, then a project can become ineffective. And I think that's where we're at right now with the STS program. We're down to the point where, if all we can do is trap and not do any treatments, then what's the sense in trapping? So we need a little more money to keep us effective. You saw what happened during the 2005 to 2009 period, how the spread rate increased because we weren't able to do as many treatments. So budgets are definitely a concern in the future. I appreciate the opportunity to talk. I can answer any questions now that anyone may have about the STS program.
Okay, thank you very much, David. We do have a question here. Could you please comment about the abundance of gypsy moth this year? There were several reports of outbreaks this year across the country. Any ideas as to why?
Well, I can talk about here in Ohio. I know we had a slight wet spring, and then it turned off very hot and very dry. So we in northern Ohio and northeast Ohio, the Entomophaga mamaga fungus has established itself, but during the dry period, right at caterpillar stage, it died out, it dried out. So it wasn't as effective in helping the natural control of the gypsy moth populations. So that's why I feel it's happened here in Ohio. The other regions, I would have to, I would say is probably the same situation. We're seeing the global warming. We're seeing these hot spells come through and dry things out, and the natural controls are not helping.
Okay. What can people at the local level do to try to manage gypsy moth?
Well, at the local level, I mean, a lot of it's firewood. Make sure that you're buying from someone's reputable, and that the firewood hasn't come from a generally infested area without being inspected. to make sure there's no life stages on it. If you're going traveling into gypsy moth infested areas for camping or vacation or anything like that, make sure you check your outdoor equipment that you're taking back home. Make sure there's no life stages on it. We get a lot of trailers that end up with egg masses on them, or outdoor toys and equipment that have egg masses. And if you're moving from an infested area to a non-infested area, make sure that the mover has checked all your stuff, outdoor equipment and so forth, and make sure that nothing is attached to it. And kids, I know the caterpillars are fun to catch, but leave the caterpillars where you find them, and don't take them home.
They aren't pets.
No.
Okay. In the projected spread map, there is a gap under Lake Michigan in both projections. It looks to be Lake and Porter counties. Why is that area white? There have been multiple sites popping up in that area in the past few years.
Let me go back to Michigan here. Are we, you talking this map here? Or are we looking at spread?
Yes, it was the projected spread map.
Okay, projected spread map. Okay. Yeah. Repeat the question again now.
Let's see. Why is the area white under the Lake Michigan? It looks like the Lake and Porter counties. He says there have been multiple sites popping up in that area in the past years.
Okay. The reason it's white is that the tan area, or the dark area, is the quarantine areas of each state. So if those states have, this is an older map, it's probably 2 or 3 years old. So at that time that this map was made, those areas had not been quarantined yet. So that's the reason I can give you right now.
Okay. Can you explain what you used to create the barrier zones?
What we do is we set grid, when it all started, we set out grids at 5 and 8K to determine the 10 moth line. That is the average catch per trap along the line, along this, we call the frontal boundary. From that point, we measure out 100 kilometers and make a 100-kilometer wide barrier zone. And that's our STS action zone. In that action zone, we drop our grid sizes down to 2 and 3K for detection, and then down to 500, 250, 500, and 1K for delimiting potential problem areas.
Okay. Vince Burkle says Lake County in Indiana is not currently quarantined in Indiana. So that was just a comment there.
Okay.
Are there other questions? I think that's all I've got at this minute, but sometimes it takes a minute for the typed chat questions to show up. But I'm not seeing anything right now. But this has been kind of interesting. Do you here's a question. What's the best defense? April asks.
What's the best defense to keep gypsy moth out? Or it's just basically is when you're in an infested area, don't bring a life stage home with you. Is keep it out of your area. If you got contractors coming in, we've seen this a few times, especially in cities where contractors will come in to do road work, and they may be from an area that is generally infested. Their equipment, their trailers, and so forth will have life stages on them. you have to be vigilant and just look for life stages and destroy them if you see them.
Okay, we have some questions about pesticides or in treatments. If someone wanted to treat, what is the treatment you'd recommend for an infested area? A BT or triage are the suggestions and questions here, or is there other recommended treatments?
Well, there's a lot of stuff that works really well. Tall Star, we've used it on what we call wolf trees, where you got one single tree that's totally infested. Demlin, Mimic are two good growth regulators for individual trees. Sites, if you're doing larger areas and want to have less impact on non-targets, then BT is a good treatment. BTK is a good treatment. There has been some imidacloprid systemic type treatments done. I know Ohio State University did some on their main campus for gypsy moth control. So with the systemic type, though, you need to get it in there well ahead of time, because it takes time for the material to get up into the tree and be in the leaf surface when the caterpillars start feeding on it. So trapping is very labor intensive. The barrier bands around the tree are very labor intensive. It can be done, but it's mainly used for detection, so forth. 7 insecticide also has been very effective for us when we've done individual treatments on small areas. So those are what I would recommend.
Okay. Cliff Sadoff says that imidacloprid does not kill caterpillars. Let's see, what's it? Oh, also, I wanted to ask you: is there treatment recommendation information available that folks could go to and look at, like on a website or something like that?
Most of the universities have on their website fact sheets and so forth, and methods of control and so forth. Okay. So go to Michigan State or Ohio State and either Maryland and so forth. And most state universities have a fact sheet on gypsy moth and methods of control.
All right, good. Let's see. How much damage do gypsy moths do to trees in outbreak and non-outbreak years? And when should we start getting worried when we see the outbreak?
What I've seen here, and I've got an example, one of our state forests up in Lorain County, they had a infestation last year, 2017, and did nothing about it. 2018, it became a major outbreak, and right now they're estimating they've lost between 30 and 50 big white oaks in that forest area or in that park because they hesitated. When you see gypsy moth starting to develop, you need to act fast, because the egg masses will contain anywhere from 500 to 1,000 eggs per egg mass, and that population can explode very, very quickly. I calculated one time, if you took 500 egg masses and say you had 20% mortality and 50% or 25 or 30% of them were female, you can have a population grow into the millions in just 3 years. And mortality rates, the study done in Pennsylvania back in the, I think it was the 80s, showed that, that the first year defoliation, you could see an 18% mortality rate, depending on the health of the trees. 2 years in a row of heavy defoliation, that mortality rate jumps to about 89% on oaks. And then 3 years, you're at 99%. Oaks just can't recover after being defoliated that long. Their root reserves are expended because they haven't been able to go through photosynthesis with leaves available, and it just kills the tree.
Great, thank you. Vince Burkle comments that unlike emerald ash borer, emamectin benzoate only lasts 1 year in the tree when used for gypsy moth control.
Okay.
I bet. Okay.
I've never used it. I know the university, Ohio State University, used it on their main campus there. So I don't know how the results were on that, but that's what their people were trying.
Okay. So it was kind of like a study to see if how
Right.
well they were. Okay. All right. Are there other questions, folks? Looks like we've gone through all the ones that we have right this minute. But this has been interesting. You know, like you say with gypsy moth, it's, you know, many years ago, oh, we got rid of that, but no. now hopefully we know more about how, you know, the whole how gypsy moth, the lifestyle and biology, so we can do, you know more about it. So that's good.
And we got the materials to handle with the pheromone being developed and so forth, and then the decision algorithm and stuff that helps us decide where we need to take action at, and when we take action early, what the overall results are.
Yes, that is true. I just wanted to reiterate again, for those of you wanting CEUs and CCF credits, I will be sending out an email to everyone who participated and registered. So, and give you that information, how you can obtain that. If there's no more questions, then I would like to thank you very much, David, for helping us out with getting out the information about gypsy moth through Emerald Ash Borer University. And let's see. Oh, there's one more question. Is there an effort to get more funding? Is there anything we can do to help?
Just contact your congressman, and you know, when they come up with the budget, that the Forest Service needs more funding for invasive species and the gypsy moth line to help us keep this under control.
It sounds like good. We can keep trying. Good effort.
Yeah, that's all we can do is, you know, contact our elected officials and let them know that you have concerns and you about this insect, and we need the funding.
All right. Well, thank you again. Keep up the good work. And folks, I will send out also some David's email address if you have any questions following this and would like to contact him. And from there, I hope you all have a good day, and I will be closing the meeting. Thank you again.
Thank you.